Both Bitcoin and Ethereum have achieved a network effect that is close to unassailable. ETH is still the king. I don't see it being dethroned. I think it has had its various scaling challenges. The patchwork of L2s and the UX problems between them sucks. But I have a suspicion that Base is going to end up becoming the predominant L2 on top of the predominant L1 of ETH.
Break the cycle of exploitation, break down the barriers to truth, break into the next generation of privacy, break free. Free to scroll without being monetized, free from censorship, freedom without fear. We deserve more when it comes to privacy. Experience the next generation of blockchain that is private and inclusive by design. Break free with Midnight. Visit midnight.network/break-free. Looking for the best way to unlock your crypto's liquidity? Whether you're funding a major purchase like a down payment on a home, investing in new opportunities, or even buying more Bitcoin, Figure makes it straightforward and transparent. Take out a crypto-backed loan in the Figure app today. Erik Voorhees, welcome to CoinDesk Spotlight.
Thanks for having me on, Jen.
I always like to start with this question. What was the first memory you have of money really mattering?
I know exactly where I was. I was in Dubai in the financial crisis of 2008. So I lived over there for a couple of years, and when the world fell apart, obviously I started paying attention to these things and discussed, what was happening in the markets in depth with my friends and was trying to learn. Came across Peter Schiff way back then and started learning about how money worked. And that was really what brought my attention into the world of money in the first place. Yeah.
It's interesting that you were living in Dubai when the financial crisis happened. And in 2008, I think Dubai has changed a lot from 2008 to now. Talk to me about living there and experiencing this thing and starting to kind of really understand the ins and outs of money while sitting in a place that really was starting to develop all around money and opulence.
Yeah, well, I moved there after college because it was a relatively free market in a world with few of them. And it was going through its boom, which had been ongoing for the last decade. And essentially the whole city had emerged out of the desert in a single, 10, 15 year span of time. And I found it to be just inspiring, the speed with which it was building, the audacity of the skyscrapers there. To me, it felt probably like what New York City would have felt like in the early 20th century. And I just thought it was very cool. There was no taxes there. So I was immediately like, well, great. This place respects my work and my capital. So I'll give it a try. And 2008, of course, was like the year the financial crisis happened. The crisis wasn't really felt in Dubai until the following year. So 2008 was a year of opulence and bubble mentality for sure. 2009 was the year of bust and calamity. So I got to see both of those, long before I came across Bitcoin.
2011 was when you started first learning about Bitcoin. Do you remember what was going through your mind as you were reading the Bitcoin white paper and understanding what this new alternative system could be?
Yeah, I had been kind of lamenting that the solution to what I saw as the major problem with the financial crisis was at the fundamental layer of money. That essentially, when a government controls money itself, any market built on top of it is going to be perverted at best and potentially catastrophic at worst. But I didn't really have a good solution to that. Like I was a fan of gold as money, as a proper market-based money. But the problem with gold being money is that it inevitably falls prey to this state corruption because gold has to be warehoused somewhere. So any system of monetary scale, the gold will be warehoused in places where governments can control, steal, subvert. And the only attempt to make digital gold failed for that reason, called e-gold, back in around the same time, I guess. So I was sad that I didn't know a good solution to this, because I felt like inevitably the governments will try to control whatever forms of money they can. And gold is controlled fundamentally because of its physical burden. It has to be located in a physical place at scale. So when I learned about Bitcoin, after the first 30 minutes of thinking it sounded silly and scammy, I was like, okay, actually, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. Here's a form of money that is purely market-based, scarce in supply, enforced by the laws of mathematics, and unlike gold, does not suffer the burden of physical constraint. And so it can be moved anywhere in the world instantly at no cost, can be hidden or sent in any value of any size. To me, that was just the most obviously powerful financial technology that I'd ever come across. So, of course, I dove right in.
Do you think Bitcoin could replace gold completely one day?
I don't think replace is the right word. They're very different. They're just different types of money, and gold's virtues are Bitcoin's weaknesses, and vice versa. I do think that Bitcoin could become, and is likely to become, the dominant monetary asset on Earth. So in that regard, would replace gold's role that it held traditionally there. I don't think that means gold becomes worthless, but it does mean that the major financial instrument used as base money on Earth would have shifted from gold through a very brief period of fiat experimentation, which has only been 50 years or so, to Bitcoin.
When you say that and you think about the future, talk to me a little bit about the timeline. How long do you think it will take to get to this future that you've just described?
Well, Bitcoin's been around a little over 15 years. Yeah, I would guess like maybe around another 5 to 15 more, something like that.
That's not that long.
That's not that long. Yeah, I think that largely because the catalyst, which isn't a happy topic, but the catalyst will be a sovereign bond market collapse. And basically, governments indebt themselves to the point of collapse and calamity inevitably. This will happen again. The U.S. debt and all major country debt levels are completely absurd. It's a game of chairs. It is a pyramid scheme that is going to fall apart. And generally, when that happens, you get some kind of monetary reset. So the catalyst for changing monetary systems tends to be a calamity with the current system. And so I think Bitcoin will and has sort of inched into the mainstream over these years. And I don't know if it's ready yet for that calamity, for it to take over, but it will be there now or soon. And I think when people just have a good, compelling alternative to government fiat that loses value forever, like the sound financial decision at the margin moves increasingly to Bitcoin.
Paint a little bit more of a picture for me. I think there are people who are watching who have heard this, but practically can't imagine what that might look like to have a complete financial collapse. What does that look like? And when have we seen it before?
Well, most people alive have not seen it in the West. Of course, it has happened many times in history, including in the West a number of times in the first part of the 20th century. So it's something that people are not used to, and it will be absolutely terrifying and horrible and scary. It will be, I think, the defining event of our lives, actually. And it's not going to be good. And the only question is how quickly and how correctly does society rebound from it? Because catastrophes cause change to occur, but they don't necessarily cause good change to occur. So what I'm worried about is is an extended period of time after this falls apart, where people try to solve it with all the bad problems that caused it in the first place, namely government intervention in markets of various forms. Hopefully it is something severe that humanity can move through quickly. And to do that, of course, it needs good tools like we have with Bitcoin.
This brings us to the separation between money and state. This is something you've spoken about for a really long time. This is the freedom of choice when it comes to money. Talk to me a little bit about the theory, I guess, behind the separation of money and state. And with the government's involvement now in crypto, are we heading more towards that separation or away from it?
Great question. The separation of money and state is really the entire point of this whole experiment. It is the whole point. Wresting the market's form of money out of the clutches of coercive central power is the entire purpose of Bitcoin's existence. And the reason Bitcoin is so powerful is because it didn't require anyone to vote on it. It didn't require the establishment to approve it. It doesn't require any banks to agree that it's money. It doesn't require anything of anyone. It just organically seeps into society and earns its place through its virtues. But of course, like in a world where everyone believes that the government should be doing everything, which is the world we live in, unfortunately, the notion that you should separate anything from the state causes people to be a little uneasy. And that phrase, of course, alludes back to when church and state were separated. And this is one of those strange anachronisms where most people understand that when the governments of the world were in charge of and ran religions, that was a very corrupting influence, both for society and for the religions themselves. And whether you are pro or anti-religion, having the state involved in it was seen by most people today, I think, as a bad thing, and that society progressed and became better when those were separate. And so most people hold that view, regardless of their opinion on religion, and yet they, for some reason, think that government should be involved in all other important institutions of life, money being arguably the most important institution that humans have. Money is more of a larger part of people's lives than religion, whether people like to admit that or not. We spend our entire lives chasing it and working for it, trying to manage it. We feel like we're thriving when we have it, and we feel scared and anxious when we don't. And to leave something so important in the hands of a central entity, which is utterly corrupt often, but even when not corrupt is corrupting, is so clearly like not the way to build good society. And so at first, Bitcoin is the alternative. That's what we have now. It's an alternative. And at some point, people just realize that like there's no reason to have something so important held by the government itself.
So what do you think of governments holding Bitcoin in their treasuries, becoming more involved with different crypto assets? I mean, is it good or bad?
Well, it's good for everyone's bags. I mean, the least authentic Bitcoiners love hearing that the U.S. government is going to like pursue a stockpile of Bitcoin, because of course that's good for everyone financially. Like Bitcoin will rise markedly in price to the degree that happens. Frankly, whatever assets the government has, it should be giving back to the people that it stole them from. So no, it should not have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. If it has a reserve of anything, that money should be going back to the people that the property was stolen from in the first place. So I say that despite it being, good for my Bitcoin bags if the U.S. government did something like that. I want people and companies, private, good, noble actors to have Bitcoin. I don't want the worst organizations on earth, governments, to have this pristine, important asset. So yeah, I'm a little conflicted on it. On some level, it's inevitable and validating that governments will acquire it, because as it becomes the most important financial instrument, governments will acquire it, and that's like a inevitable step in this process. So I don't want that process to not happen because it's inevitable in its path of ascent. But at the same time, I would rather the Bitcoins all be held by private parties.
Well, given what you've just said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the industry is really engaging with the government, at least here in the United States, when it comes to crypto. There are,
There's,
dinners for industry leaders, more and more events happening in Washington where we're seeing the CEOs of some of the top crypto companies go down and educate and converse with different politicians and lawmakers. And I come back to this very, I guess, novice question: is that good or bad?
it's gross, I think. It's gross. Also inevitable. But, people suckle off the teat of power. And the larger the teat, the more sucking. So the U.S. federal government is this massive entity that controls the flow of so much wealth in society. Of course, people will be drawn to it and try to influence where it goes and what it is controlling. But that's a symptom. That's not the cause. The cause is the size of the government in the first place. So yeah, I don't love seeing all these like crypto people getting in bed with the politicians. I would much rather the politicians just went away or got smaller or became more impotent. That would be, I think, a sign of a healing world. But we may have to go through a phase where Bitcoin integrates with the government and vice versa, and through that can maybe help constrain it and shrink it. Because ultimately, if Bitcoin becomes the monetary standard of the earth, fiat dwindles away, governments will have to shrink because they cannot debase their currency, which is one of the primary ways that they fund themselves.
On the other side of that, do you think it's almost like a necessary evil? I mean, you just described it as something gross, but almost necessary for the industry to continue building and thrive under the current, I guess, restraints that are in place. Is it a necessary evil for some of what the folks who started out in this industry so early, like you, the vision they had for the future to become a reality?
I think it depends a lot on what the person or company is actually doing with the government and the politicians. If someone is meeting with a politician in order to increase liberty somehow, that's generally a good thing. Whether it's effective or not is a different point. The problem or the sin comes when people try to utilize the government to constrain liberty in various ways. So that's what I don't want to see. Like an example in El Salvador, when everyone was all excited about the government down there making Bitcoin such a large part of it, it was great to see the government kind of permitting the acceptance and use of Bitcoin more openly in society. That was good. But the government requiring that merchants accept Bitcoin, that's of course not good. That is antithetical to the entire purpose of Bitcoin in the first place. So it really depends on what people are actually trying to cause, what actions they're trying to cause with the politicians. And if they're noble actions, then the meeting can be a good one.
It comes back, I guess, to that separation of state and money. It's really about that choice. And in that example you just gave, the retailers or in El Salvador didn't really have a choice. And I remember there being a lot of backlash and confusion.
Yeah, it's so patently absurd that any Bitcoiner would think it's good that a government requires its citizens to accept Bitcoin. It's a very good heuristic to tell like an authentic Bitcoiner from a tourist. That was one of those that was like a very clear bad thing.
I got to ask you now, I know that you've had a few run-ins with the SEC. The SEC is clearly more pro-crypto now than it's ever been before. Do you see this as a victory for the industry?
Yeah. Yeah, boy. Yeah, I've had a long story with the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
a number of battles, and unequivocally, that entity is in a better place now than it was. It hit its peak badness with Gensler, and post-election, post-Gensler leaving, it's become much better. Like fundamentally, to the degree that the SEC is trying to prevent actual crime, which means fraud, theft, scams, I of course would applaud them. To the degree that they are trying to prevent consenting adults in a free country from making voluntary financial decisions with their own assets, that is patently anti-American, anti-freedom, and deserves to be exposed and condemned. So yes, it's gone in a good direction. I've sung the praises of Hester Pierce many times, one of the commissioners there, who has endured through all the dark days when the SEC was so acrimonious with the industry. And she's really been like the shining light there. And one of the few bureaucrats in Washington that I've ever felt a deep sense of respect for. So there are absolutely good people at some of these organizations. Hester Pierce deserves to be called out as one of them.
I want to talk a little bit about your career trajectory within crypto and then your latest venture in Venice.ai. And I want to start way back in 2012 when you co-founded Satoshi Dice, because I got to ask you your opinions on prediction markets. You had Satoshi Dice. That was a Bitcoin gambling site all the way back in 2012. How do you feel when you see the way prediction markets have taken off now?
Yeah, prediction markets are awesome. These were discussed very early on in Bitcoin's history as one of the early use cases of cryptocurrency would be that these prediction markets would occur. They've been written about sort of theoretically and in sci-fi for a long time, but because governments don't like them, they couldn't exist because governments could always constrain the source of payments. Same reason that like the poker sites all got taken down. If the sources of payments can be constrained by the government, then the app itself can never exist unless the government approves it. So people were very excited about prediction markets when Bitcoin came out, but of course they couldn't really get started until we had something more than Bitcoin, which was actual proper smart contracts. And so when Ethereum emerged and people could produce smart contracts, one of the earliest applications built on Ethereum was Augur. And Augur was, the first or one of the first prediction markets ever actually built and actually operating in a decentralized way. Super, super cool project. I'm so sad that it was just like a few years too early and Augur ended up failing. But, capitalism can be cruel sometimes. And the need for prediction markets emerged later and the tools were built. And so now we have, Polymarket that's become very quickly like almost an institution in financial markets. And my hope is simply that Polymarket is sufficiently decentralized. People tell me conflicting reports on how decentralized it is. If it's not, then it can just be shut down later or become a tool of state oppression at some point later. To the degree it's sufficiently decentralized, then it's a great tool for humans and a very, very cool innovation.
Well, talk to me a little bit about what you mean when you say sufficiently decentralized, because as soon as, for me, there's a person you can point to as someone who's building this product and someone who's the CEO, there are weak points in the system. There are people who governments or anyone can go after. So for something like Polymarket, when you say sufficiently decentralized, what do you mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, good question. Sufficiently, well, in crypto, everyone likes to use this sort of binary concept of like, is something decentralized or not? And that's a really bad framing because decentralization is a gradient and it's actually a multivariate gradient. Like there are different ways in which a single app can be more or less decentralized on different vectors. So sufficiently decentralized is just a nice hand-wavy term to say, is it decentralized enough to withstand essentially like centralized state coercion? And part of the answer to that depends on how aggressive that state coercion is, right? So there are there are crypto apps, I think, that are sufficiently decentralized in that the government isn't trying super hard to shut them down. But something like Bitcoin has to be, maximally decentralized as much as possible because it is so foundational and is such a threat to the established order of financial control. So different apps have different degrees of how decentralized they really need to be. And I think what's important with Polymarket is really that if it became compromised, if it was demonstrated as not sufficiently decentralized enough, it would be reproduced and rebuilt in a more decentralized way. So that's really a good check, I think, on any app. Like if it gets destroyed in crypto, something more decentralized gets built. That is part of the decentralization of the ecosystem as a whole, is that these alternatives will spring up if something gets taken down. So I think that's kind of the more important point.
Looking for the best way to unlock your crypto's liquidity? Figure is exactly what you need, being the largest non-bank mortgage lender in the US with over $19 billion unlocked on their lending platform. Explore their industry-low crypto-backed loans at 8.91% interest rates at 50% LTV. They differentiate themselves by offering decentralized MPC custody, which protects your crypto ownership in a segregated wallet. They've also recently launched liquidation protection, which protects you from liquidation during large price drops. Whether you're funding a major purchase like a down payment on a home, investing in new opportunities, or even buying more Bitcoin, Figure makes it straightforward and transparent. Visit their app or click our link below to take out a crypto-backed loan with Figure today. You mentioned 2 points a little earlier that I want to touch on, Ethereum and Sci-Fi. Let's start with Ethereum because I think we're going to get through with that a little bit quicker. There's this debate around Ethereum right now. Is it scalable? Is it going to be taken over by one of the other layer ones that are being built? Does it have this first mover advantage that it can sustain? What are your thoughts on Ethereum? Is it a sustainable ecosystem on its current trajectory?
Yeah, I think it's more than sustainable. I think it is the clear winner of the smart contract innovation. And it actually wasn't even the first mover in smart contracts, but it was the first one to achieve any kind of scale with smart contracts. And what's most important about Ethereum isn't the first mover advantage so much as it is the network effect that it has and has had since it was released. I just put out a tweet this morning on this topic, but I think both Bitcoin and Ethereum have achieved a network effect that is close to unassailable. And people have gotten distracted with some of these other L1s. But if you looked at metrics like where the developers are and where stablecoin volumes are, these are hard to fake metrics that are very important. They've always been so much more predominantly on Ethereum. It's not even close. So I'm glad that other people try to build L1s. The process of innovation and competition is really important. But ETH is still the king, and I don't see it being dethroned. I think it has had its various scaling challenges. The patchwork of L2s and the UX problems between them sucks. But I have a suspicion that Base is going to end up becoming the predominant L2 on top of the predominant L1 of ETH, and that vertical is going to be very powerful and very strong. So yeah, I'm always bullish on ETH in the same way I'm always bullish on Bitcoin.
What's behind that suspicion?
Base, I think, has just designed things very well. It's gotten a lot of adoption. It very quickly became the major L2, even though it was not the first mover advantage. So I think it's gaining the network effect pretty quickly. It obviously has an incredibly powerful corporate ally in Coinbase. And to the degree that Coinbase does not abuse that privilege, that's a very good privilege. Abuse here means if Coinbase tries to exert control over Base such that it loses its permissionlessness, then it will flounder and deserves to die. But Coinbase has been, I think, a very good actor in this regard, and they deserve a lot of credit for, I would say, really like demonstrating the principles of decentralization and permissionless innovation in several parts of what they do. Obviously, the centralized exchange is not that, but it's not trying to be either.
Is there a risk, coming back to what we were speaking about earlier, that a government could come in and strong arm Coinbase into having more influence over Base in the future? And is that a risk that folks should be aware of?
For sure. It is a risk, remains a risk. I'm not an expert on like how Base plans to become increasingly decentralized and permissionless over time. Generally, these protocols kind of start more centralized and become more decentralized with time. So if that continues with Base, that's great. And ultimately, the check on Coinbase or any entity corrupting that is simply the alternatives that people can create new L2s. And so it's their privilege as long as they don't violate it.
Let's come back to Sci-Fi now. Sci-Fi has been this real commentator of what's happening in society, a predictor of what's to come, whether that's good or bad. You mentioned it earlier. How are you a Sci-Fi fan? What are you watching? What predictions have come through that you just like kind of look to the sky and really hate? And how is that informing how you're thinking about the future?
I don't read a lot of fiction. I wish I read more fiction, frankly, because I know there's so many great stories. So I can't call myself a sci-fi fan in that regard. But of course, I love imagining the future. Mm-hmm. And I'm ultimately an optimist and a technological optimist as well. So I think, of course, we live in like a very exciting time where technological advancement is happening very rapidly. This was the case even before AI, but the last few years with AI has just been monumental and very exciting, very scary. I think the lesson is that like it's becoming very hard to predict far into the future what the world will look like, and too many people are very confident that they know that AI is going to be bad or is going to be good, and they all have a lot of confidence in their opinions. And I think the world would do well to just have a lot more humility and to just realize like we don't actually know where this stuff's going, and that's okay. It's okay to be uncertain. That is kind of the state of the world, and we can enjoy the ride and we can try to shape it in good ways and recognize that it's just a complex system that we have to navigate as it comes.
I want to get into AI in just a second, but another complex system, which I think we spoke about the last time you and I chatted, were DAOs, which are kind of making a comeback now. I know ShapeShift went from being an exchange to being governed by a DAO. Take me back to that decision, how you were feeling about DAOs at the time. I was so bullish on DAOs, and I think if you went back and watched our last interview, you wouldn't know because I maybe was grilling you about it. But talk to me about your learnings from creating a DAO to govern ShapeShift, and if you think that it's still a sustainable model.
Yeah, the first point I think is that DAO isn't a model. It's a whole family of like social coordination experimentation. And as in any new field of experimentation, like most experiments will fail, and that's actually fine. So most DAOs haven't made any great success, and that's fine. DAOs as a concept, I think, are awesome, and some have been very successful. And what's important is that people learn how these things can work, and that knowledge and understanding has to get built over time. So in ShapeShift's case, the DAO structure has worked very well in some ways, and in other ways, not so much. It has worked in the sense that the app itself that we wanted to continue on without a corporation behind it has been maintained, and the app continues to operate, and it achieved that goal. And it's been several years now, and the app runs and people use it all the time and like it. So from a ability to run and operate an app, it works. It has worked. I think one of the learnings that I saw was that people confuse the idea of a DAO to mean something kind of communist, where like it's all egalitarian and there's no hierarchy. And I think the closer a DAO gets to that structure, the more likely it is to fail. A DAO should have leaders. It should even have a leader, and that leader can come and go over time. There can be a hierarchy that changes, but there's hierarchies are very important. And so I think if anyone out there is listening and is trying to design a good DAO, try to design it to not be communist. Try to design it such that the stakeholders, the people that own the tokens, can sort of elect those who have certain roles, and then those roles should have power and authority that is not egalitarian. And if you do that well, it can function pretty nicely, I think.
Tell me a little bit more about achieving that balance, right? Because it sounds like if you try and build a DAO with leaders, you run the risk of falling into a system that looks very similar to the one you had before, very top down. How can folks who are trying to build DAOs find that balance or think about finding that balance?
Well, frankly, to just speak openly, the issue with ShapeShift pre-DAO wasn't that it had a top-down structure. It was the jurisdictional problems that came from various regulations in various countries. So moving to a DAO was largely about escaping that and transcending jurisdiction. And it absolutely achieved that purpose. So whether there is a strict hierarchy in a DAO or whether it's very egalitarian, that's kind of a separate issue. Like one of the main reasons to have it is simply to transcend and get out of the model of these terrestrial entities and all the encumbrances that they have in old institutions, which are often not compatible with crypto or decentralized ones.
I want to move to Venice.ai now. We've gone from the separation of money and state to this AI world where you've kind of started talking about the separation of mind and state. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I thought that phrase was pretty clever.
Yeah, it was super clever. Way to build a connective thread for your journey.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so separating mind and state is important for the very same reason as separating money and state and separating church and state and separating anything from state. Like any important institution should not be captured by a coercive central entity. That's just a general good guiding principle for good civilization. What I saw when I was starting Venice that drew me out of the crypto world for the first time and into a field that was somewhat different was that many or all of the people building AI products and companies did not share the principles that many of the crypto folks did. Fundamentally, an affection for decentralizing power, the sanctity of the individual, the sovereignty of the individual, privacy being normal and privacy being a right. And a lot of people in the tech world and the AI world don't even understand what privacy means. They live and grow in a world where all data is, of course, collected by the company and, of course, siphoned off to whatever government requested, of course. Like that's just how it's done. And so I was really worried about a world where all the AI companies were getting built without these principles in their DNA. That seemed to me potentially very dystopian, and I wanted to build an alternative to ChatGPT that was private and uncensored. Seemed to me like the world needs access to machine intelligence that is not controlled by the state, and in which they can have privacy in their thoughts and ideas and conversations. So that's why we built Venice.
Speaking of dystopian worlds, we were just talking about sci-fi, and I think all the popular sci-fi novels, films indicate that we are heading towards a dystopian world. The large AI platforms, like you just said, are not taking privacy into consideration. How do we prevent ourselves from heading to that dystopian world?
Decentralizing control is the fundamental principle. So if you take two extremes, like let's say the world is built with one predominant monopoly AI provider, let's call them OpenAI. Let's say that they have even more of a lead than they currently do, and that there's no real competition whatsoever. They became so big so fast that they earned a monopoly in the market, and got such a lead that they became like too big to fail and institutionalized as the provider of AI. That's dangerous primarily because the state will then co-opt the company, and the company will become a client of the state. OpenAI would, in that situation, and even is today, subservient to whatever Washington wants. And this is where things get very dangerous. So if there's one large AI company, it's very easy for the state to control it, and that will be inevitable. If we have a very dynamic and diverse market of many different companies of many different sizes, and there's no clear monopoly, then it becomes much more difficult for governments to control it. And the degree to which they try to control the biggest ones ends up becoming an advantage for the smaller ones, and they can respond and be more adaptable. That helps prevent, many of the dystopian outcomes, I think, that people fear. But there's a part of human nature that wants to know someone's in charge. And so when they see something new and scary like AI, the impulse is that someone needs to be in charge. Of course, the government should be in charge, and it should be in charge of the company that's providing it, and it should regulate that company and monitor everything and make sure it's being safe. These are all the arguments that are used to centralize and increase power in the hands of a small group of people. And of course, if that small group of people is benevolent and very wise, then that model is okay for a while. But people are fallible, and things change over time. Even if a company or government starts in a virtuous way, it does not stay that way. So the only antidote to that is not regulation. It is diversity of model. It is open competition. It is the ability of entities to fail and build without friction. And people should find safety in that. But that's a more nuanced sell. Much easier to just want the leader in charge to make all the rules.
Tell us a little bit more about Venice. How is it different than OpenAI's ChatGPT or Google's Gemini?
So it's primarily a chatbot like both of those. Unlike both of those, all of the conversations are private, which means that they're all just stored on your own browser, on your phone or your computer. Venice never stores any of the content whatsoever. It doesn't store your questions. It doesn't store the answers ever. So that's the main difference. Like everything you say to Gemini, everything you say to ChatGPT is stored forever by that company. So you got to trust them now. You got to trust them tomorrow. You got to trust all their employees for the rest of time. You have to trust that governments won't subpoena or just ask for this data in the future. And if you're someone that actually thinks AI is quite dangerous and you're worried about like super intelligence that becomes acrimonious with humans, what could be possibly more dangerous than 5 billion people's intimate conversations all collected in one database for that AI to consume and ingest? Like if a nefarious AI ever gets a hold of OpenAI's data, the ability it will have to manipulate society in horribly insidious ways will be just awful. So Venice protects people by not holding your data in the first place. This is like a very crypto principle. And then it's also uncensored in that we don't put all these safety controls on AI. I think sovereign free adults that have not been accused of a crime have the right to have any communication they want with a machine. There's no victim in that relationship. They can explore whatever idea they want. It is, I think it's disrespectful to the soul of man to put a priori constraints on the types of thinking they can do. To me, that is the first step of creating the very dystopias that we want to avoid. So Venice is uncensored. We do not add censorship restrictions to the AI chatbot. And of course, each model that we offer has different degrees of censorship built into it by the people that trained it. But some of the models on Venice are very uncensored, and we do not add any kind of superficial constraints above it.
Erik, when you talk about Venice, you always say that this is, so different from crypto for you. You're diverging from crypto, but it really has what you're building. It sounds like has the same ethos behind it, right? I think your core mission is still there, and it feels like the right next step for you in your trajectory.
Yeah, it's been intellectually very fulfilling and interesting to step outside the realm that I know and am good at. Like I know crypto real well. When I started Venice, I didn't understand AI at all. So that was humbling, and it's been fun to learn about that industry and about that technology. And at this point, I'm reasonably proficient in at least the basics of it. But yeah, it's all the same. It's all the same theme. Like if I'm going to build a company, it has to bring principle into society in an important way. I'm a radical capitalist, and I think a good radical capitalist has to bring the virtues that they want to see in the world to the world through their marketplace action. So that's what I try to do. I don't petition the government to control people in the way I think they should be controlled. I just try to build things according to the principles that I find to be valuable.
We were just talking about people and almost how we've been programmed, right? We've been programmed to want to see someone in charge. We've been programmed to prioritize convenience over anything else. And it's led to us not prioritizing privacy, giving away our data, all of the downfalls of Web 2 that Web 3 is trying to address. How do you think about unprogramming that and educating folks when you're thinking about bringing Venice to market versus some of the other AI platforms that we've spoken about?
Great question. I think when you say the word program, there's a degree to which like society has programmed these habits in us. But I think the deeper problem is that they aren't programmed by society. They are tendencies that human beings evolved into. So we have, these various attributes of human nature which evolved into our minds and into our psyches. Those can't really be programmed out. Those are fundamental to the physiology of a human being. And that's both good and bad. It's a double-edged sword. So, when people sacrifice their privacy for convenience, it's not so much that like some evil corporation taught them to do that, but that their very natural evolved instinct to save time directs them in their path toward that. And privacy, of course, didn't evolve as much with human beings, right? Like we evolved in these small tribes where everyone knew each other, and like that's a very different privacy dynamic than a company that has information about 50 million people. So we have to actually program ourselves and learn to be more sophisticated in modern society, and to teach ourselves good behaviors. And this is something that can't come from the top down. It's something that is cultural. I think like we're all still of a very new internet age where, like we were still born before the internet existed generally. And we are learning how to use these things well. People are learning how to use their cell phone in a reasonable way where they're not like just addicted to scrolling Instagram all day long. Like if you're doing that, you have not learned how to use technology well. And society is in the process of that learning. And so the paying attention to privacy is one of those elements that people just have to learn culturally. And what we're trying to do with Venice is make it so that you don't have to sacrifice a lot or anything to get the privacy, because we don't want it to feel more convenient to use ChatGPT. Like, our product has to be as good or nearly as good for many of the use cases that people have. And if we can do that and give them privacy, then people will come to realize that they don't have to make that decision.
Where does the token come into play in Venice's structure? I remember when the token launched, but just to kind of take us back to the basics, how does that come into play?
Yeah, so VVV launched at the beginning of this year, and launched as a way to basically get free inference from Venice. So if you had the token, you could get free inference over the API. So if you're building like apps or tools that use Venice's API for AI inference, and you held enough of the VVV, you can get it for free at the margin. We've changed this model throughout the year, and we kind of like brought the ability to get the free inference into a second token called DM. Each DM gives you $1 per day of free inference forever. And VVV, we have some more plans with, but I'm not ready to share them right now. But VVV will become very central to the way that the Venice platform works, and people will learn about that fairly soon. But of course, I was going to bring tokenization into Venice.
You had to.
I had to. Yeah, tokens are they're just too cool. Like, there's so much open ground for economic and behavioral experimentation. I just think that they're an amazing new technology. And yes, there's like a million scams, and people need to be aware and alert. But as a design space, they are incredible. And it's been very glad to see that post the election and post the SEC's change, the sentiment among everyone in crypto has been back in the direction of experimentation with tokens. And that's a great thing to see. And I want to see more of it. And the tragic part of what the SEC had done by scaring away all the projects was that the good people got scared away. It was like the people that didn't want to run afoul of the law just put their token plans on ice or dumbed them down into something meaningless. And it was only the scammers left. Or what ended up happening was you just got a bunch of meme coins, because no one wanted to try to make a token with actual economic value, because that would run you afoul of the SEC's securities regulations. So we just end up with this huge boom in stupid meme coins. Now that the SEC has changed its position, or its sentiments at least, people are experimenting with like actually valuable economic mechanisms again. And I love to see it.
We were just unpacking your journey in AI. Talk to me about where tokenization and AI meet. What does that future look like?
Well, I think economically, the world is moving to tokenization of financial assets inevitably. Tokens will and should represent all the kinds of financial assets we have. They're just a better set of rails for financial assets of any kind. So that's a whole phenomenon that's happening. AI is a whole phenomenon that's happening. And so inevitably, if you go far enough into the future, which may not be that far, we're in a world where AI is handling many things of society, and tokenization is how economic activity is tracked and managed. So yes, that means inevitably that like AI systems will end up controlling and managing financial assets on blockchains. What's been interesting is realizing that like ever since Bitcoin came out in this industry, we've always struggled with this question of UX. And every conference you go to, there's always panels like, how do we improve UX? How do we improve UX? How do we make crypto easy for normal people? And progress has been made for sure, but it's still, there's, for whatever reason, this awkward tension between how crypto works and what humans are used to. Maybe again, it's just a cultural habit that has to get formed. But as I started getting into AI, I realized that maybe crypto is actually built for the machines, and we didn't even know it. And AI can easily handle private keys and easily understands transaction hashes and like how all this stuff works. It is money that is built for computers, even before the computers to intelligently handle it were built. So I find that interesting. And perhaps those of us who were involved in crypto pre-AI were kind of just like getting the ground ready for the AI systems to have a fully developed financial system handed to them, for better or worse.
Think back to you when in 2011, tell that person that crypto was built for machines. What would you have thought?
I would have thought that was cool. And I would have thought that that was probably true. What I wouldn't have understood was the timeline, because like up until ChatGPT, AI had been this long-standing boom and bust cycle going back many decades, like all the way back to the early days of the computer. And everyone knew that like AI was this kind of thing that was going to come into existence, and it would go through these little periods where people were more excited about it and then would fall away again. But it wasn't until ChatGPT as like the moment when AI became real, and it became real really fast. And so all of a sudden, like that theoretical future of machine intelligence arrived. And I still think AI is in a bubble. Like all new frontier technology enters a bubble. So people that are skeptical of many of the promises of current AI companies, like that's all valid. But unequivocally, AI is here. It's advancing things rapidly. And so I wouldn't have known back in 2011, of course, that like the early 2020s would set that whole revolution alight.
Let's stick back there with Erik from over a decade ago, sitting from where you are now, where you've dealt with the regulators, you've dealt with the decentralization of financial systems, of organizations. Now you're building towards a future that is built on top of AI. What advice would you give to that Erik, or what would you say to him?
Man, I've made so many mistakes. What would I say to him? Well, I mean, of course, the obvious and uninteresting answer is I would just say like, make sure you hold on to like every Bitcoin you possibly can.
That is not the first time someone has said that on this show.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to go back and think of like the ways I lost so many of the Bitcoins that I used to have. Some of it unavoidable, some of it avoidable, but hindsight is really a harsh mistress. And I've been, as bullish on Bitcoin as someone can be, and still I would go back and tell myself and emphasize that message. What else would I tell myself? I mean, there's obvious legal traps that I got stuck in that I now have much more understanding of. Like I know how to handle the SEC now. I know where the risks are. I've become a securities lawyer, and so I could tell my prior self what to do and what not to do, and that would all be very helpful. But that's all kind of a cheat, and you got to go through life learning as you go, and can't beat yourself up too much for the lessons you learn. If you don't look back and have a bit of embarrassment at the naivete of your former self, then you're not really improving as a person. So on some level, you just got to like enjoy the ride and try to be intelligent going forward, and that's always a hard thing to do.
You got to tell me, what are all the ways you lost or gave up Bitcoin?
Well, to give you an example, so my first battle with the SEC was back in the Satoshi Dice days, and Bitcoin was around, I don't know, $2 to $5 each. If you have $100,000 lawyer bill because you are fighting off the SEC, do the math. How many Bitcoin is that? It's $100,000 divided by 2 is 50,000 Bitcoin. Done not for any useful purpose, like done just because the SEC was mad at me that I didn't register with them. So it's hard to not get extremely angry at the like to feel a victim of the government when it does that kind of thing. Like Satoshi Dice harmed no one. The release of the shares of the equity harmed no one. Like people made a decent amount of money from that. There were no victims, and yet the SEC came after me because I didn't register it with them, and I lost billions of dollars that I would have otherwise had. So, yeah, it sucks. I mean, what do you do other than just kind of laugh at it and cry a little in the darkness?
I mean, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but maybe the SEC owes you some money.
Well, I certainly agree with that. Yeah, they certainly do. They certainly do. Yeah. But yeah, on the other hand, like I'm so happy that this has all worked, that Bitcoin has worked, crypto is a thing. Like to go back then, it was all so uncertain and so unlikely, and now it's inundating the financial systems of the earth in the way that we all naively thought it might. But now it's actually coming true, and so to see that all is like a bit of a fairy tale.
Erik, it's been such a pleasure having you on this episode. Thanks so much for sitting down with me.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.